Hello and welcome to study session number 23 of Daily Memory Lab. In today's study session, we will be covering round 5 of e-way bill page number 9 to 15, round 4 of Supply Under GST page number 52 to 56, round 3 of charge of GST page number 8 to 13, and round 2 of page number 34 to 38 charge of GST. And then based on the time availability, we will progress with 5 to 6 new pages today. On that note, let us start with round 5 of e-way bill. E-way bill in case of bill to ship to model. In a bill to ship to model of supply, there are three persons involved in a transaction, namely a person who has ordered B to send goods directly to C, B, the person who is sending goods directly to C on behalf of A, and C, the recipient of goods. In this complete scenario, two supplies are involved and accordingly two tax invoices are required to be issued. Invoice 1 will be from B to A because of the order, and invoice B will be from A to C because C is the one who is receiving goods and C has to make a payment to A. It is clarified that as per CGST rules 2017, for the movement of goods which is taking place from B to C on behalf of A, either A or B can generate the e-way bill, but it may be noted that only one e-way bill is required to be generated. Okay. Invoice information to be furnished in e-way bill. Part A comprising of details of GSTIN of supplier and recipient, place of delivery, indicating PIN code also, document, tax invoice, bill of supply, delivery challan or bill of entry. Bill of entry, number and date, value of goods, HSN and reasons for transportation, etc. to be furnished by the registered person who is causing movement of goods of consignment value exceeding 50,000. Part B, transport details, transport document number, goods receipt number or railway receipt number or airway bill number or bill of lading number and vehicle number in case of transportation by road to be furnished by the person who is transporting the goods. However, information in Part A may be furnished by the transporter on an authorization received from such registered person, first proviso to Rule 138 Sub Rule 1, or by the e-commerce operator or courier agency where the goods to be transported are supplied through such an e-commerce operator or a courier agency on an authorization received from the consignor, second proviso to Rule 138 Sub Rule 1. Once the consignor or consignee enters all the details in Part A of the e-way bill, a Part A slip is generated which contains a temporary number. This slip can be shared with the transporter or used by the supplier himself later to enter the details in Part B of the e-way bill and generate the e-way bill. This will be useful when supplier has prepared invoice relating to his business transaction but does not have the transportation details. Thus, he can enter invoice details in Part A of the e-way bill and keep it ready for entering details of modes of transportation in Part B of the e-way bill. Once the goods are ready for movement from the business premises and transportation details are known, the user can enter the Part B details and generate the e-way bill for movement of goods. E-way bill can be generated only after entering the details of Part B. Who is mandatorily required to generate e-way bill? E-way bill is to be generated by the consignor or consignee himself if the transportation is being done in own or hired conveyance or by railways or by air or by vessel. If the goods are handed over to a transporter for transportation by road, e-way bill is to be generated by the transporter. Where neither the consignee nor consignor generates the e-way bill and the value of goods is more than 50,000, it shall be the responsibility of the transporter to generate it. This has been explained in detail below. Where the goods are transported by a registered person, whether as a consignor or recipient as the consignee, whether in his own conveyance or a hired one, or a public conveyance, or by road. The said person shall have to generate e-way bill by furnishing information in Part A, Part B on the Common Portal 138 Subrule 2, where the e-way bill is not generated by the registered person and the goods are handed over to the transporter for transportation of goods by road. Then the registered person shall furnish the information relating to the transporter in Part B on the Common Portal, and the e-way bill shall be generated by the transporter on the said portal on the basis of the information furnished by the registered person in Part A. Where goods are transported by railways or by air or by vessel, the e-way bill shall be generated by the registered person, being the supplier or the recipient, who shall either before or after the commencement of movement furnish information in Part B with transport document number, GRN, RRN, AWB number, BOL number on the common portal. Other important points: where the goods are transported by railways, there is no requirement to carry e-way bill along with the goods, but railways has to carry invoice or delivery challan or bill of supply, as the case may be, along with goods. Further, e-way bill generated for the movement is required to be produced at the time of delivery of the goods. Railways shall not deliver goods unless the e-way bill required under rules is produced at the time of delivery. Proviso to Rule 138 Subrule 2A. The registered person or the transporter may, at his option, generate and carry the e-way bill even if the value of the consignment is less than 50,000. First proviso to Rule 138 Subrule 3. Where the movement is caused by an unregistered person, either in his own conveyance or hired one or through a transporter, he or the transporter may, at their option, generate the e-way bill. Second proviso to 138 Subrule 3. Where the goods are supplied by an unregistered supplier to a person who is recipient who is registered, movement shall be said to be caused by such recipient if the recipient is known at the time of commencement of movement of goods. Explanation 1 to Rule 138 Subrule 3. When it is not mandatory to furnish the details of conveyance in Part B, e-way bill is valid for movement of goods by road only when the information in Part B is furnished, but the exceptions are: however, the details of conveyance may not be furnished in Part B of the e-way bill where the goods are transported for a distance up to 50 kilometers within the state or union territory from the place of the business of the consignor to the place of business of the transporter for further transportation, or from the place of business of the transporter finally to the place of business of the consignee. Unique e-way bill number. Upon generation of the e-way bill on the common portal, a unique e-way bill number shall be made available to the supplier, the recipient, and the transporter on the common portal. Transfer of goods from one conveyance to another. Where the goods are transferred from one conveyance to another, the consignor or the recipient who has provided information in Part A or the transporter shall, before such transfer and further movement of goods, update the details of conveyance in Part B of the e-way bill on the common portal. Rule 138 Subrule 5. Consignment of goods may be required to be consignment of goods may be required to be transferred from the original conveyance to another conveyance due to unforeseen exigencies like breakdown of the vehicle. In such cases, the transporter transferring goods from one conveyance to another in the course of transit shall, before such transfer and further movement of goods, update the details of the conveyance. In some cases, consignments are transported by the transporter through transshipment using multiple vehicles, same mode of transportation, for carrying the same consignment before it is delivered to the recipient at the place of destination. Hence, for each movement from one place to another, the transporter needs to update the vehicle number in which he is transporting that consignment in Part B of the e-way bill. User can update Part B as many times as he wants for movement of goods to the destination. However, the updating should be done within the validity period. There can also be a case where one e-way bill can go through multiple modes of transportation before reaching destination. As per the mode of transportation, the e-way bill can be updated with the new mode of transportation by using the option of update vehicle number. Example number 2. Babbal Associates is moving the goods from Cochin to Chandigarh through road, ship, air, and road again. First, Babbal Associates generates the e-way bill by entering first stage of movement by road from its place to shipyard and enters the vehicle number. Next, it will submit the goods to shipyard and update the mode of transportation as ship and transport document number on the e-way bill system. After reaching Mumbai, Babbal Associates or concerned transporter updates movement as road from shipyard to airport with vehicle number. Thereafter, Babbal Associates or transporter updates using update vehicle number on the portal the airway bill number. Again, after reaching Delhi, Babbal Associates updates movement through road with vehicle number. This way, the e-way bill will be updated with multiple modes of transportation. Okay, so on this note, we will wrap it up here. This is today's quota. So, okay, I'm sorry, we have to read till page 15. Couple of more pages. Assigning the e-way bill number to another transporter. The consignor or recipient who has furnished the information in part A or the transporter may assign the e-way bill number to another registered or enrolled transporter for updating the information in part B for further movement of the consignment. Okay, rule 138 subrule 5A. However, once the details of the conveyance has been or have been updated by the transporter in part B, the consignor or recipient, as the case may be, who has furnished the information in part A shall not be allowed to assign the e-way bill number to another transporter, proviso to rule 138 5A. A consignor is required to move goods from city X to Z. He appoints transporter A for movement of his goods. Transporter A moves the goods from city X to city Y. For completing the movement of goods from city Y to Z, transporter A now hands over goods to transporter B. Thereafter, the goods are moved to the destination from Y to Z by transporter B. In such a scenario, only one e-way bill will be required. Part A can be filled in by the consignor and then the e-way bill will be assigned by consignor to transporter A. Transporter A will fill the vehicle details in part B and will move the goods from city X to city Y. On reaching city Y, transporter A will assign the said e-way bill to the transporter B. Thereafter, transporter B will be able to update the details of part B. Transporter B will fill in the details of his vehicle and move the goods from city Y to city Z. Press release 144 dated 31/3/2018. Consolidated e-way bill. Okay, after e-way bill has been generated where multiple consignments are intended to be transported in one conveyance, the transporter may indicate the serial number of e-way bills generated in respect of each such consignment electronically on the common portal, and consolidated e-way bill in form GST EWB02 may be generated by him on the said common portal prior to the movement of goods. Consolidated e-way bill is a document containing the multiple e-way bills for multiple consignments being carried in one conveyance, that is, the transporter carrying multiple consignments of various consignors and consignees in a single vehicle can generate and carry a single document, consolidated e-way bill, instead of carrying separate document for each consignment in a conveyance. Consolidated e-way bill is like a trip sheet and it contains details of different e-way bills in respect of various consignments being transported in one vehicle, and these e-way bills will have different validity periods. Hence, consolidated e-way bill does not have any independent validity period. Further, individual consignment specified in consolidated e-way bill should reach the destination as per the validity period of the individual e-way bill. Further, where the consignor or consignee has not generated the e-way bill in form GST EWB01 and the aggregate amount of the consignment of and the aggregate of the consignment value of goods carried in the conveyance is more than 50,000, the transporter, except in case of transportation of goods by railways, air, and vessel, shall, in respect of interstate supply, generate the e-way bill in Form GST EWB 1 on the basis of invoice or bill of supply or delivery challan, as the case may be, and may also generate a consolidated e-way bill in Form GST EWB 02 on the common portal prior to the movement of goods. Okay, Rule 138, Sub Rule 7. Generation of Form GST EWP 02 is optional and not mandatory. However, where the goods to be transported or supplied through an e-commerce operator or a courier agency, the information in Part A of Form GST EW1 may be furnished by such e-commerce operator or courier agency. This proviso is not yet effective. Information submitted for e-way bill can be used for filing GST returns. The information furnished in Part A of the e-way bill shall be made available to the registered supplier on the common portal, who may utilize the same for furnishing the details in Form GSTR 1, Rule 138, Sub Rule 8. However, when the information has been furnished by an unregistered supplier or unregistered recipient, he shall be informed electronically if the mobile number or the email is available. Proviso to 138 Sub Rule 8. Cancellation of the e-way bill. Where an e-way bill has been generated but goods are either not transported or not transported as per the details furnished in the e-way bill, the e-way bill may be cancelled electronically on the common portal within 24 hours of generation of the e-way bill. Rule 138 Sub Rule 9. However, an e-way bill cannot be cancelled if it has been verified in transit in accordance with the provisions of Rule 138b, first proviso to Rule 138 9, Sub Rule 9. Okay, within 24 hours. Further, unique e-way bill number generated is valid for a period of 15 days for updation of Part B. Okay, we have completed today's quota, round 5 of this segment. On that note, let us move to round 4, which is the next segment, Supply Under GST, page number 2.52 to 2.56, so 52 to 56. Okay, so this portion, taxability of tenancy rights under GST. Okay, we had a bit of confusions. I'm still not clear about this. So anyway, I'm just going to read this and see if I'm able to something, if any bulb lightens up, I don't know. Anyway, just let me read it. Pagadi system, that is transfer of tenancy rights against tenancy premium, is prevalent in some states. In Pagadi system, the tenant acquires tenancy rights in the property against payment of tenancy premium, that is Pagadi. The landlord may be owner of the property, but the possession of the same lies with the tenant. The tenant pays periodic rent to the landlord as long as he occupies the property. The tenant also usually has the option to sell the tenancy right of the said property, and in such a case has to share a percentage of the proceeds with the owner of land as laid down in the tenancy agreement. Alternatively, the landlord pays to tenant the prevailing tenancy premium to get the property vacated. Such properties in Maharashtra are governed by Maharashtra Rent Control Act 1999. It has been clarified that the activity of transfer of tenancy right against consideration is squarely covered under GST, supply of service liable to GST. So that is what I am going to keep in mind. For me, I am still not able to figure out what is the system, but the activity of transfer of tenancy right against consideration, this is like a trigger statement for me. Transfer of tenancy right against consideration. So this is going to be covered under GST. That is what is more important for me. This is from exam perspective. Anyway, it is a form of lease or renting of property, and such activity is specifically declared to be a service in para 2 of schedule 2 as discussed in the table above. That is, any lease, tenancy, easement, license to occupy land is a supply of service. Okay, although stamp duty and registration charges have been levied on such transfer of tenancy rights, it shall still be subject to GST. merely because a transaction or supply involves execution of documents which may require registration and payment of registration fee and stamp duty would not preclude them from the scope of supply and from payment of GST. The transfer of tenancy rights cannot be treated as sale of land or building in para 5 of Schedule 3. Thus, it is not a negative list activity, and consequently, a consideration for the said activity shall attract levy of GST. To sum up, the activity of tenancy rights is squarely covered under the scope of supply and taxable per se. Transfer of tenancy rights to a new tenant against consideration in the form of tenancy premium is taxable. However, renting of residential dwelling for use as a residence to an unregistered person is exempt. Hence, grant of tenancy rights in a residential dwelling for use as residence dwelling against a tenancy premium or periodic rent or both to an unregistered person is exempt. As regards services provided by outgoing tenant by way of surrendering the tenancy right against consideration in the form of a portion of tenancy premium is liable to GST. Okay. Clarification on agreeing to the obligation to refrain from an act or to tolerate an act or a situation or to do an act. Okay, so it is considered as supply. Let us see what they are one by one. Agreeing to the obligation to refrain from an act. Example of activities that would be covered by this part of the expression would include non-compete agreements where one party agrees not to compete with the other party in a product, service, or geographical area against a consideration paid by the other party. Okay, another example of such activities would be a builder refraining from constructing more than a certain number of floors, even though permitted to do so by the municipal authorities, against a compensation paid by the neighboring housing project which wants to protect its sunlight, or an industrial unit refraining from manufacturing activity during certain hours against an agreed compensation paid by a neighboring school which wants to avoid noise during those hours. Agreeing to the obligation to tolerate an act or a situation. This would include activities such as shopkeeper allowing a hawker to operate from the common pavement in front of his shop against a monthly payment by the hawker, or a residential welfare association tolerating the use of loudspeaker for early morning prayers by a school located in the colony, subject to the school paying an agreed sum to the RWA as compensation. Agreeing to the obligation to do an act. This would include the case where an industrial unit agrees to install equipment for zero emission at the behest of the RWA of a neighboring residential complex against a consideration paid by such RWA, even though the emission from the industrial unit was within permissible limits and there was no legal obligation upon the individual unit, no industrial unit, to do so. Above three activities must comply with the following conditions. There must be an express or implied agreement or contract must exist. Above three activities must be under an agreement or a contract to fall within the ambit of para 5 of Schedule 2. In other words, one of the parties to such agreement or contract, that is the first party, must be under a contractual obligation to either refrain, tolerate, or do. Such contractual arrangement must be an independent arrangement in its own right. Such arrangement or agreement can take the form of an independent standalone contract or may form part of another contract. Thus, a person can be said to be making a supply by way of refraining from doing something or tolerating some act or situation to another person if the first person was under an obligation to do so and then performed accordingly. Such a contract cannot be imagined or presumed to exist just because there is a flow of money from one party to another. There must be an express or implied promise by the recipient of money to agree to do or abstain from doing something in return for the money paid to him. Consideration must flow in return to this contract or agreement. Some consideration must flow in return to return from the other party to this contract, that is, or agreement, the second party to the first party for such refraining or tolerating or doing. Okay, which of the following activities or transactions qualify as supply of goods? Dhruvatra Electronics supplies washing machines to its customers. Yes, that is a supply of goods. Big Bang Steels Limited supplies a machinery on rent. So machinery on rent is service. Larsen Technicians retreats the tires given by Deen Dayal Automobile on work basis. So we just saw here works contract. All works contract are to be treated as supply of service. So on job work basis. Next, Vigyan Technologies develop a customized software. Customized software, development of software is again supply of service. So on that note, we have completed our second target. This is also complete. Now let us go to the third target, which is round 3 of page number 3.8 to 3.13. Charge of GST. 3.8 to 3.13. Extent and commencement of GST law. CGST Act extends to the whole of India. So India means territory of India as referred to in Article 1 of the Constitution. Its territorial waters, seabed and subsoil underlying such waters, continental shelf, exclusive economic zones or any other maritime zone as referred to in the Territorial Waters, Continental Shelf, Exclusive Economic Zone and Other Maritime Zones Act 1976. The airspace above its territory and territorial waters. Okay. State GST law of the respective state or union territory with legislature extends to the whole of that state or union territory. State includes a union territory with legislature. IGST extends to the whole of India. UTGST extends to the Union Territory of Andaman Nicobar, Lakshadweep, Dadra Nagar Haveli, Daman and Diu, Ladakh, Chandigarh and other territory, that is Union Territories without legislature. Okay. Next, Sudhakar Enterprises has undertaken an intrastate supply of taxable goods. CGST and UTGST will be paid on the said supply provided the supply is made within Delhi. SGST will come. Puducherry, SGST will come. Ladakh, no legislature, so UTGST will come. Jammu and Kashmir, yes, there is legislature, so SGST will come. Okay, now levy and collection of CGST and IGST, Section 9 of the CGST Act, Section 5 of the IGST Act. Subject to the provisions of subsection 2, there shall be levied a tax called CGST on all intrastate supplies of goods or services or both, except on the supply of alcoholic liquor for human consumption on the value determined under section 15 and at such rates not exceeding 20% as may be notified by the government on the recommendations of the council and collected in such manner as may be prescribed and shall be paid by the taxable person. So there is another definition that was coming, or I think we saw yesterday, taxable person. The central tax on the supply of petroleum crude, high-speed diesel, motor spirit, commonly known as petrol, natural gas and aviation turbine fuel shall be levied with effect from such date as may be notified by the government on the recommendations of the council. The government may, on the recommendations of the council, by notification, specify categories of supply of goods or services or both, the tax on which shall be paid on reverse charge basis by the recipient of such goods or services or both, and all the provisions of this act shall apply to such recipient as if he is the person liable to pay the tax in relation to such supply of goods or services or both. The government may, on the recommendations of the council, by notification, specify a class of registered persons who shall, in respect of supply of specified categories of goods or services or both, received from an unregistered supplier, pay the tax on reverse charge basis as the recipient of such supply of goods or services or both, and all the provisions of this act shall apply to such recipient as if he is the person liable for paying the tax in relation to such supply of goods or services or both. The government may, on the recommendations of the council by notification, specify categories of services, the tax on intrastate supplies of which shall be paid by the electronic commerce operator if such services are supplied through it. And all the provisions of this act shall apply to such e-commerce operator as if he is the supplier liable to pay the tax in relation to supply of such services. So this particular clause talks only about the services. It is not talking about supply of goods. Provided that where an electronic commerce operator does not have a physical presence in the taxable territory, any person representing such e-commerce operator for any purpose in the taxable territory shall be liable to pay tax. Provided further that where an e-commerce operator does not have a physical presence in the taxable territory and also he does not have a representative in the said territory, such e-commerce operator shall appoint a person in the taxable territory for the purpose of paying tax, and such person shall be liable to pay tax. Okay, anyway, whatever we saw here in the section 9 of CGST Act has been replicated here. So I'm saving the reading for this segment. Only difference is that here the rate is 40%. That's it. And section is 50%. No, the section is section 5. There the section was section 9. Apart from that, everything is just copy paste. So that concludes our today's quota of this segment. So this is also complete. Page number 3.8 to 13 is also complete. Now let us go to this last revision segment, which is 34 to 38, page number 34 to 38. We will revise this e-commerce operator notified services. E-commerce operator is any person who owns, operates or manages an e-commerce platform for supply of goods or services or both. Sometimes e-commerce operator itself supplies the goods or services or both through its electronic portal. However, many a times the products or services displayed on the e-commerce portal are actually supplied by some other person to the consumer. When a consumer places an order for a particular product or service on this e-commerce portal, the actual supplier supplies the selected product or services to the consumer. The price or consideration for the product or service is collected by the e-commerce operator from the consumer and passed on to the actual supplier after a deduction of commission by the e-commerce operator. So to give a quick example, let us say Uber is one such e-commerce operator or Ola is one such e-commerce operator. It provides the platform. We, the consumer, can book a cab. The taxi driver is not owned by Ola. The taxi driver is not owned by Ola, neither the vehicle. So we place an order for a trip, and then the website matches the cab and the passenger, and then the cab actually provides the service, finishes the trip, and then the price is charged by Ola. The money initially goes to Ola, and after that it deducts its commission 30-40% depending on the transaction. I'm not sure about the exact rate. Let's assume 30-40% commission, and then the balance amount is paid to the driver. So this is what I think they are covering here. Okay, the government may, on the recommendations of the council, notify specific categories of services, the tax on supplies of which shall be paid by the e-commerce operator if such services are supplied through it. Such services shall be notified on the recommendations of the GST Council. Notification number 17 dated 28/6/2017 as amended has notified the following categories of services supplied through e-commerce operator for this purpose. Services by way of transportation of passengers by radio taxi, motor cab, maxi cab, motorcycle or any other motor vehicle except omnibus. Okay, so exactly the first category is like Ola, Uber and Blue Smart and all those cab services. Services by way of transportation of passengers by an omnibus except where the person supplying such service through e-commerce operator is a company. Okay, Services by way of providing accommodation in hotels, inns, guest houses, clubs, campsites, or other commercial places meant for residential or lodging purposes, except where the person supplying such service through electronic commerce operator is liable for registration under section 22 subsection 1. Okay, services by way of housekeeping such as plumbing, carpenting, etc., except where the person supplying such service through e-commerce operator is liable for registration under subsection 21. See here, services by way of transportation of passenger, they have not specified except where a person is liable for registration, because they believe that in this clause the service provider is going to be a taxi driver, so most likely is not going to be a registered person. It's not where a company private limited will register itself as a driver under Ola or Uber. Any person who is registered under Ola, Uber, Blue Smart are going to be individual taxi drivers, so they are not going to be registered under GST. So that's why this exception clause is not given for this first first point. But if you see here, services by way of providing accommodation in hotels, yes, a lot of hotels are themselves companies like Tata or like any Lemon Tree, any type of hotel chains that you see, they will be themselves company, but they will be registered under Make My Trip or whatever be the website, GoIBibo, Trivago, all these websites. Services by way of housekeeping, same. We have a company called Urban Company in Chennai. They do this housekeeping, cleaning, and a little bit of repair work, maintenance work. So Urban Company is actually a company. So that itself is a company. So they are the e-commerce website as well as they are the service provider. But there could be some other company who can be the actual company who does the repair, who sends the manpower, but they will be registered under Urban Company. So if in such case, I think the person who is actually providing the service will be liable for paying GST. Supply of restaurant service other than the services supplied by restaurant, eating joints, etc. located at specified premises. Supply of restaurant service other than the services supplied by restaurant located at specified premises. So this is the last point is Swiggy and Zomato. So any restaurant basically registered under Swiggy or Zomato supplies food. The service provider is deemed to be Swiggy or Zomato, the e-commerce operator, but they are excluding certain things located at specified premises. We have to see what is the specified premise. Okay. Tax on services by way of transportation of passengers by an omnibus provided by a company through ECO is not payable by ECO. It will be payable by the company itself. I think, yeah, this one is Red Bus, Abibus thing. And there are lots of buses that register themselves under Red Bus. So in Chennai, there is a bus service called Hebron. And you also have this KPN, Chennai, Bangalore, that route. So they are also companies and they will be listed under Red Bus. So in that situation, I think the bus service, if they are company, they will charge GST and they will pay GST. Okay, radio taxi means a taxi including a radio cab by whatever name called, which is in two-way communication with a central control office and is enabled for tracking using global positioning system or general packet radio service. Maxi cab means any motor vehicle constructed or adapted to carry more than 6 passengers but not more than 12 passengers, excluding driver for hire or reward. Motor cab means any motor vehicle constructed or adapted to carry not more than 6 passengers, excluding the driver for hire or reward. Motor car, it means any motor vehicle other than a transport vehicle, omnibus, road roller, tractor, motorcycle, or invalid carriage. Omnibus means any motor vehicle constructed or adapted to carry more than 6 persons, excluding the driver. Okay, specified premises would mean premises providing hotel accommodation service for, having a declared tariff of any unit of accommodation above 7,500 per unit per day or equivalent. Okay, company means a company incorporated under the Companies Act of 2013 or any other previous company law. It is important to note here that the above provision shall apply only in case of supply of services. Okay, next step. Okay, this is where we had a huge amount of confusion yesterday, but anyway, let us read this through. Tax on above services supplied through ECO shall be paid by the ECO. All the provisions of CGST or IGST shall apply to such ECO as if he is the supplier liable for paying the tax in relation to the supply of above services. The ECO may, on services notified under section 9 of 9 subsection 5, including on restaurant service provided through ECO, pay GST by furnishing the details in form GSTR 3B, reporting them as outward supplies. Okay, in this regard, following issues have been clarified. ECOs not to collect TCS in respect of restaurant services so notified. ECOs will no longer be required to collect TCS and file form GSTR 8 in respect of restaurant services on which it pays tax in terms of section 9 subsection 5. ECOs not required to take separate registration for paying tax on restaurant service supplied through them. Okay, as ECOs are already registered in accordance with Rule 8 as a supplier of their own goods or services, there would be no mandatory requirement of taking a separate registration by the ECOs for payment of tax on restaurant service under Section 9 subsection 5. ECO to pay tax on any restaurant services supplied through them. ECOs will be liable to pay GST on any restaurant service supplied through them, including services supplied by an unregistered person. Supply of restaurant services will be included in aggregate turnover of persons supplying restaurant services through ECO. It is clarified that the aggregate turnover of persons supplying restaurant service through ECOs shall be computed in accordance with the definition of aggregate turnover under section 2 subsection 6 and shall include the aggregate value of supplies made by the restaurant through ECOs. Accordingly, for threshold consideration or any other purpose in the CGST Act, the person providing such restaurant service through ECO shall account for such services in his aggregate turnover. Okay. Restaurant services provided through ECO not to be considered as inward supply for ECOs liable to RCM. Restaurant services provided through ECO not to be considered as inward supply for ECOs liable to RCM. ECOs are not a recipient of restaurant services supplied through them. Since these are not input services to ECO, these are not to be reported as inward supply in form GSTR 3B. Okay. Reversal of proportionate ITC on input goods and services not required by ECO. ECOs provide their own service as electronic platform and as an intermediary for which it would acquire inputs or input service on which ECOs avail input tax credit. The ECO charges commission or fee for the service it provides. The ITC is utilized by the ECO for payment of GST on services provided by ECO on its own account. The situation in this regard remains unchanged even after ECO is made liable to pay tax on restaurant service. ECO would be eligible to ITC as before. Accordingly, it is clarified that ECO shall not be required to reverse ITC on account of restaurant services on which it pays GST in terms of section 9 subsection 5. It may also be noted that on restaurant service, ECO shall pay the entire GST liability in cash. No ITC could be utilized for payment of GST on restaurant service supplied through ECO. Okay, this portion is about this ITC. To be honest, I was much more comfortable in reading this entire thing until here. Even this also I kind of understood, but I'm not like sure about the clarity like how I had for this passage, this segment. Anyway, no problem. We are just in round 2. I'm quite glad that this thing got clear. At least I understood what I read. Okay, let me read point number 7 and 8 and let us wrap up. Yeah, 7 and 8 and then just one more page. GST to be paid by supplier on services not notified under section 9 subsection 5 of CGST Act but supplied through e-commerce operator. In respect of supplies not notified under section 9 subsection 5 but supplied through an e-commerce operator, the liability to pay GST continues on such a supplier and ECO shall continue to deposit TCS on such supplies. ECO to raise invoice in respect of restaurant service supplied through ECO. The invoice in respect of restaurant service supplied through e-commerce operator under section 9 subsection 5 will be issued by e-commerce operator, not by the restaurant. Okay, billing in case of restaurant service and goods or services other than restaurant service being sold by a restaurant to a customer held under the customer under the same order. There can be a situation where restaurant service and goods or services other than restaurant service are sold by a restaurant to a customer under the same order. The question arises as to who shall be liable for raising invoices in such cases. Actually, they could have done a better job by giving an example. Considering that liability to pay GST on supplies other than restaurant service through the e-commerce operator and other compliances under the CGST Act, including issuance of invoice to customer, continues to lie with the respective suppliers and e-commerce operators being liable only to collect tax at source on such supplies, and it is advisable that e-commerce operator raises separate bill on restaurant service in such cases where e-commerce operator provides other supplies to a customer under the same order. Okay, let us finalize this. If the e-commerce operator is located in taxable service, then e-commerce operator will pay tax. If they don't have physical presence in the taxable territory, then the representative of that e-commerce operator will pay tax. If the e-commerce operator is neither located nor do they have any representative in the taxable territory, then a person liable to pay tax is the person appointed by the e-commerce operator for the purpose of paying the tax. Somebody has to be there. Okay, on that note, we have covered all the revisions that fell due today. Now, from here, let us carry on and read maybe 5 to 6 pages. Classification under GST. Now we have come to a separate topic. Let us come out of this e-commerce operator segment. In order to determine the rate applicable on a particular supply of goods or services, one needs to first determine the classification of such goods or services. Classification of goods and services assumes significance since there are different rates prescribed for supply of different goods and services. Therefore, classification is crucial for determining the rate of tax applicable on a particular product or service. Classification of goods. Classification of goods means identification of the chapter, heading, subheading, and tariff item in which a particular product will be classified. So first, sections, chapter, heading, subheading, and tariff item. Chapter, heading, subheading, and tariff item are referred in the schedules of rate notification for goods under GST are the chapter, heading, subheading, tariff item of the first schedule to the Customs Tariff Act 1975. Indian Customs Tariff is based on HSN. HSN stands for Harmonized System of Nomenclature. It is a multi-purpose international product nomenclature developed by the World Customs Organization for the purpose of classifying goods across the world in a systematic manner. It comprises of about 5,000 commodity groups, each identified by 6 digits code. Code can be extended. arranged in a legal and logical structure and is supported by well-defined rules to achieve uniform classification. India has extended the HSN codes to up to 8 digits. Along the lines of HSN, the Indian customs tariff has a set of rules for rules of interpretation of the first schedule and general explanatory notes. These rules and the general explanatory notes give clear direction as to how the nomenclature in the schedule is to be interpreted. These rules for interpretation, including section and chapter notes and the general explanatory notes of the first schedule, apply to the interpretation of the rate notification for goods under GST also. Consequently, under GST, goods are classified on the basis of HSN in accordance with the rules for the interpretation of customs tariff. Once classification for a product has been determined on this basis, applicable rate has to be determined as per the rate prescribed in the rate notification issued under GST. Classification of services. A new scheme of classification of services has been devised under GST. It is a modified version of the United Nations Central Product Classification. Under this scheme, the services of various descriptions have been classified under various sections, headings, and groups. Chapter 99 has been assigned for services. This chapter has the following sections. Okay, so first thing is classification of goods, and here we see classification of services. Section 5, construction services, distributive trade services, accommodation, food and beverage service, transport services, gas and electricity distribution services. Section 7, financial and related services, real estate services, rental and leasing services, business and production services. Section 9, community, social, personal services and other miscellaneous services. Each section is divided into various headings which are further divided into groups. Its further division is made in the form of tariff item or service code. The provisions relating to Customs Act and Customs Tariff Act will be discussed at final level. Sections, a group of chapters representing a particular class of goods. Chapters, each section is divided into various chapters and subchapters. Each chapter contains goods of one class. Chapter notes, they are mentioned at the beginning of each chapter. These notes are part of the statute and hence have the legal authority in determining the classification of goods. Heading, each chapter and subchapter is further divided into various headings. Subheading, each heading is further divided into various subheadings. Chapter, section, heading, group and tariff item or service code. Rate of tax is determined in accordance with the service code in which the service is classified. GST rates prescribed for various goods. Broadly, 6 rates of CGST have been notified in 6 schedules of rate notification for goods, viz. 0.0125, 1.5, 2.5, 6, 9 and 14. SGST and UTGST at the equivalent rate is also leviable. With regard to IGST, broadly 6 rates have been notified in 6 schedules of rate notification, viz. 0.25, 3%, 5%, 12%, 18% and 28%. Certain specified goods have been exempted from tax. GST rates prescribed for various services. Broadly 6 rates of GST have been notified: 0.75, 2.5, 3.75, 6, 9 and 14. Equivalent rate of SGST or UTGST will also be levied. For IGST, 6 rates have been notified for services, viz. 1.5, 5%, 7.5, 12%, 18% and 28%. For certain specified services, nil rate of tax has been notified. Services of gambling, services by way of admission to casinos or race clubs or any place having casinos or race clubs, or sporting events like IPL, services provided by a race club by way of totalizator or a license to bookmaker in such club, gambling etc. attract the highest rate of 28% CGST at 14, SGST at 14, or IGST at 28%. A number of services are subject to a lower rate of 5%. For instance, GTA services taxed at 5% subject to condition that credit of input tax charged on goods or services used in supplying the said service has not been taken. Similarly, tax rate for supply of restaurant service other than at specified premises is 5% without any input tax credit. Services not covered under any specific heading are taxed at the rate of 18%. In the following paragraphs, applicability of GST in real estate sector has been briefly discussed. The effective rate of GST on real estate sector for the new projects by promoters are as follows: 1% without ITC on construction of affordable houses, area 60 square meter in metros and 90 square meter in non-metros, and value up to 45 lakh. 5% without ITC is applicable on construction of all houses other than affordable houses and commercial apartments such as shops, offices, etc. in a residential real estate project in which the carpet area of commercial apartment is not more than 15% of total carpet area of all apartments. Conditions: above tax rates shall be available subject to following conditions. ITC shall not be shall not be available. 80% of inputs and input services other than services by way of grant of development rights, long-term lease of land against upfront payment in the form of premium, salami, development charges, or FSI, including additional FSI, electricity, high-speed diesel, motor spirit, and natural gas used in supplying the service shall be purchased from registered persons. Okay. However, if value of inputs and input services purchased from registered supplier is less than 80%, promoter has to pay GST on reverse charge basis under section 9 subsection 4 at the rate of 18% on all such inward supplies to the extent of 80% of the inward supplies from registered supplier. Further, where cement is received from an unregistered person, the promoter shall pay tax on supply of such cement on reverse charge basis under section 9 subsection 4 at the applicable rate, which is 28% at present. Moreover, GST on capital goods shall be paid by the promoter on reverse charge basis under section 9 subsection 4 of the CGST Act at the applicable rates. Okay, so again, this section has been kind of a washout for me today. Anyway, that's okay. So we will stop with this fourth subsegment we have completed. From here on, the chapter proceeds with composition levy. So for the rest of the chapter, we will be dealing with this composition levy. So we will stop with this here. We have completed till page number 43. 3.39 to 3.43. New coverage. We have completed study session number 23. Thank you for joining. I will see you tomorrow. We will proceed further in this chapter, charge of GST. Thank you and bye bye.